Okay, um, I'd like to start off with a story about my dog, Joey. Joey was a puppy at the time, and I was had my RV parked in the parking lot of Mount Adams Buddhist Temple, and Joey and Daisy were running around, romping around, playing with Ven, and Drew, formerly known as Min Fop, came up, and I could tell that Joey was about to jump up on him, and I'm trying to train him not to. So I screamed at Joey. I screamed no, and if some of you have headphones on, I won't try and imitate that because I screamed like a crazy person. He's the first boy dog we've ever had, and they don't listen as well as the female dogs we've had before. So I have found that just to catch his attention, you kind of have to hit him over the head with a 2x4. So I screamed like bloody murder, no, to stop him from jumping up on Drew. Now, I have a problem with my voice. I tend to be very soft-spoken, and usually people tell me, speak up, I can't hear you. So here I am screaming no at Joey to stop him from jumping up on Drew, and Joey sat immediately. He got the message and sat. And Drew looks at me like, oh my gosh, because it was so out of character to me. And he was looking at me like what the heck just happened? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then his face changed and he smiled and he said, compassionate wrath. I understand. So that was kind of a very meaningful moment to me. And I think there's some lessons to be learned from that is, first of all, things are not always as they seem. And secondly, communication needs to be heard in order to be effective. And kudos to you, Venerable Jeff. You told Joey to not jump up on you. He heard you, and he did not jump up on you. So kudos to you. But more to the point, another lesson is that being forceful does not always. It can be done with compassion and without any anger. The two do not go hand in hand. So I just like to start off with that, and again, talking about the ethics of guns and our first precept, not taking lives, but cherishing lives, and how that fits in with Buddhism. Now, guns can be viewed as a great teacher, as seeing things as they are, which is something that we hear a lot in Buddhist teachings. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche has said, form is before preconception and judgment. Son Sanim is famous for saying, just put it down. We hear a lot about Prajna Paramita, and even in our Heart Sutra, form itself is emptiness, emptiness itself is form. So things are not always as they seem. One of the teachers at Buddha Dharma University, Venerable Dr. Douglas Cholsong Gentile, has a video entitled, What is Ignorance in Buddhism? And one of the points that he makes in that is when we think we know something, when we're convinced that we know something, that's when we're at risk of falling into the trap of ignorance, because then we lay our preconceptions on top of something which obscures it and closes our minds to seeing things as they really are. Perhaps could also be referred to as suchness. So things as they are. And of course, guns are a great emotionally charged thing where people have strong opinions about them. Now, I was going to bring a gun as a prop and talk about this further, but if you bring a gun to school, even if you bring a drawing of a gun to school, you get suspended. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bring a bacon cheeseburger instead to make the same point. It's just a bacon cheeseburger. But it's another thing where you can lay your own preconceptions and judgments on top of it and see it as something else. In some cultures, eating beef is an abomination. If you practice, in other cultures and beliefs, putting dairy and meats together is something you don't do. If you're a chef, this could be a work of art. This could be a matter of pride and joy. If you're on a diet, this could be torturous to contemplate a bacon cheeseburger. But when you get down to it, it's just a bacon cheeseburger. We dump all of our stuff on top of it, and that clouds seeing it for what it is. And of course, in the context of guns, that is only magnified by orders of magnitude. It's a very emotionally charged subject. So that's, and then shifting gears a little bit to some people. For example, right now in Vancouver, I live almost walking distance to a gun club. And on Monday nights, they have a precision shooting event every Monday night at 6:30, where you stand at 50 feet single-handedly with a handgun and you shoot a target, more kind of Olympic style precision shooting. Let's see, there we go. And to the people who show up to this event, it's a social opportunity. It's just getting away from the office. It's relaxing. It's a competition. It's like going to the pub and shooting pool or throwing darts. That's what a gun is to them. On Thursday nights, there's another kind of competition, which is more action shooting, where you're timed and you have to like run from station to station, and they set up targets that you're not supposed to shoot, and then behind them the targets that you are supposed to shoot. And it's a little bit like being Jack Bauer for a day. Very high pressure, and you have to think about keeping your muzzle in a safe direction, finger off the trigger, shooting quickly because you're on a timer, and shooting accurately. So you have to strike a balance, not too fast, not too slow. So again, to the people who show up to that, it's a good opportunity to just practice and hone their skills and socialize and have some fun. So to that group of people, they see a gun as a completely different thing than many other people. But it's, just like a bacon cheeseburger is just a bacon cheeseburger. We lay our own stuff on top of it. A gun is just a tool, and it's so easy to dump our stuff on top of it and see it as something, to give it an essence which it doesn't really inherently have. Again, form itself is emptiness, and emptiness itself is form. On farms, it's common to have guns because there's the situation where animals will be hurt beyond repair. And in a situation like that, often the compassionate thing to do is to put an animal out of misery. So in another context, having a firearm is really just care and compassion to animals for which one is a caretaker. And attitudes certainly have changed. A friend of mine knows, tells me that back in the olden days, high school kids would bring their Ruger 10-22, 22 kind of starter rifle. They would bring it to high school and stick it in their locker if they had target shooting practice after school. And nobody really thought anything of it. That's just what they did. Target shooting practice after school. You bring a gun to school and stick it in your locker. Now a Ruger 10-22, according to Washington state law, is defined as an assault rifle. They come in pink. Fathers buy them for their young daughters. So everyone has their own view of what these tools are. And again, obscures seeing it for what it is. As for me personally, yeah, I am a handgun safety instructor. And I teach 4 things primarily. Safety. The 3 safety rules: always point a gun in a safe direction, always keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot, and always keep your firearm unloaded until you're ready to use it. So first and foremost, I teach safety. These are people who have guns or planning on getting guns, and that's a fait accompli. It's not for me to, you know, even if I were of the opinion that all guns should be banned, these are people that have them. I want them to be safe, and I also want them to exercise restraint. We do talk about self-defense and how it is always better to not use a gun and it's always possible, but to avoid using a gun at all costs and you know, only as a last resort. I encourage everyone to get pepper spray because, again, to give people an alternative that they may not have thought that they had otherwise, and to exercise that restraint, potentially a life might be saved. By the way, if you get a pepper spray, get the kind with the little flip top, not the little rotate thing that will go off inadvertently in your pocket. We talk about options. There are, you know, levels of force, and to always choose the most, you know, the least forceful option in any given situation. But part of the teaching is for people to have skills to not be defenseless. Having grown up in New York City, I'm all too familiar with the feeling of being defenseless. And students I recently had came to the course because they were honestly afraid of their neighbors. It's, you know, it's the world we live in, and, you know, no neighborhood is immune from, you know, from problems. And the feeling of being defenseless, it's not a good feeling. I've had people come to my class who are in domestic abuse situations in which, even with a restraining order, it's just a piece of paper, and they felt defenseless and they were scared. So that is part of my teaching, to exercise restraint, be smart, give them as many options as they have. But again, part of it is really just so that people do not have to live in fear and be defenseless against those who, you know, do not exercise restraint. So is our guns good or bad or right or wrong? Is my teaching right or wrong? I honestly have absolutely no answers to that question. In fact, I have more questions about it than I have answers. So it's actually more interesting to look at the questions than for me to try and give any answers. There's a famous thought experiment called the trolley problem. The trolley problem is a hypothetical situation in which case a train is going down the tracks. You happen to be standing at the switch where a train could be diverted from one track to another. And the train is on course to run over a bunch of school children who are playing on the tracks, or to divert it and run over a single person who is on a second track. Do you pull the lever or not? And I don't pretend to have the answer to that, but it's kind of a framework in which is kind of hard to avoid in talking about guns and ethics and Buddhism. So I'm going to kind of leading up to a scenario here and then address some of the questions that it begs. Because, again, our first precept is to resolve not to kill, but to cherish all life. So the scenario is, and try and imagine yourself in this situation. Imagine you're in a room with friends and family, Sangha, whatever, and you do happen to be armed, as unlikely or likely as that may be. Again, it's a thought experiment. And someone kicks down the door with a big sharp knife and is clearly intent on killing everyone in the room. And you're kind of off to the side and he doesn't see you. What do you do? Do you just stand by, or do you use an escalation of force to the point where you might have to actually shoot that person in order to stop them from killing a room full of other people? It is not a far-fetched situation. These things happen. So better to be kind of mentally prepared for that situation than not. And again, I do not have the answer to that. I barely have the answer to that question for myself, no less for anybody else. But some of the questions that it does beg is, hopefully you have knowledge of a continuation of force. The first of which, and I'm going to kind of condense this, the first is verbal jujitsu. There's a wonderful story that I heard of someone traveling in Japan on the subway. And he had studied martial arts. And some person came into the train, obviously either drunk or something was wrong with him, but he was being verbally abusive, and his abuse was escalating. And this person, a Westerner on the train, observing this, who had studied martial arts, he's starting to get himself in the mindset that, oh my gosh, here I am. I may have to use my my martial arts to stop this situation. And he's just starting to realize that he's going to have to take action when another person on the train calls to this person who's causing a commotion and says, hello, Hashimoto-san, my old friend, I've missed you so much. And the guy who's kind of going crazy turns around and looks at him. And he says, yes, remember, I saw you, in such and such place. And he makes up some story. And he's engaging this person with this wildly fictitious story of childhood activities. And he totally derails whatever was going on in this person's mind. And totally de-escalated the situation. And the person who's about to get up and, knock this guy in his head, thought to himself, that is a real martial arts master. So the first step on a force scale is called verbal jujitsu for de-escalating a situation. That is where ideally situations can begin and end. The next level up is hand-to-hand self-defense skills. The next level up is pepper spray or whatever you happen to have handy, a chair, anything. And then the fourth level on a continuum of force scale is use of deadly force. Again, it's important to learn that you start with the lowest level of force that you possibly can if you're in a situation where you find it, where you find yourself compelled to defend people. So again, that's the scenario. Those are the options and the questions that this all begs really, looking into your own heart and looking into the heart of whoever the attacker is. Is what they're doing born of action, greed, or desire? Is what they're doing born of delusion, or is it born of anger? What is motivating them? And as a result, contemplating that, if you do find yourself where you have to defend them, would it be done out of anger or out of compassion? Part of the first precept is to cherish life. In a self-defense situation, even though you're at kind of conflicting odds as to what to do, are you cherishing the life of the people in the room? Can you cherish life and still kill another? Can you actually use lethal force and not be angry at that person? These are all questions that are all of a very personal nature, but are really to the point of this. Just like when Joey was about to jump up on Drew, or Venerable Jeff, when Joey was about to jump up on you, I have a feeling you weren't angry with him, but so you can use forceful means, be it just a shout, with compassion and without any anger. So again, these are some of the questions that arise. They're not easy questions, but they are what they are. What is motivated by anger? What is motivated by compassion, even though it may look forceful to others? So again, it's a situation, it's a thought experiment that really begs more questions and introspection than I'm certainly not here to give the right answer. So the whole issue is a wonderful lesson that actually brings us to the Noble Eightfold Path. The first being right view. Are we viewing something just as it is, or are we laying our own impressions and judgments and preconceptions on top of it? That's a tough one. We all view things from, filtered, just as Venerable Miles was talking about earlier. Right intention. If we do act in self-defense, is it to cherish life, and is it done out of compassion or otherwise? I resolve not to indulge in anger, but to exercise restraint. And sometimes you're put in a place where you're at conflicting odds with that. Right speech. In self-defensive situations, you need to communicate as loudly as you need to in order to be heard. Just as if a dog is going to jump up on you, you don't just say, "Oh no, don't jump up on me." You have to use the continuum of force, and if it hopefully can stop at something like pepper spray to communicate your opinion that you better stop what you're doing and use pepper spray. It's not dissimilar to raising your voice to a dog. Right action, again, that brings us back to the continuum of force. Use as light a touch as you possibly can. Right livelihood, that's one that I it certainly applies to me, being a handgun safety instructor. And then that's why I like to stress in my classes restraint, avoidance, options, and safety. Right effort, that certainly applies because particularly with firearms, we're actually, you are safer if you practice with it. It's not the kind of thing you read a book, take a class, and forget about it. In order to be safe, you need to be proficient and comfortable and not nervous and have a good muscle memory for how to use a gun. And then certainly with right mindfulness and right concentration, well, anything can be a good practice, a good schoolroom for mindfulness and concentration. But just as with the Monday night target shootings and the Thursday night action shooting where you have to run against the clock and shoot some targets, not shoot others, mindfulness and concentration play a very big part of that. So it's a very complicated subject. I know I raised more questions than answers, but that's kind of the nature of the beast. And that is kind of my insights into the nature of the relationship between life and death and Buddhism and guns and self-defense. So with that, that's all I have, and I would welcome any questions or any scenarios or anything additional from any of y'all. So, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I would like to, my history with guns goes way back, and I was among those high school students who took his rifle to school and did after practice. I actually had awards in marksmanship and later got my trophy in archery, which I switched over to because for some obscure reason, I felt that shooting somebody with a bow and arrow was less harmful than with a gun. I don't know where I got that, but I just decided that archery was more of a Buddhist thing to do. I think it was the book Zen and the Art of Archery that convinced me of that. But the other thing is that choice that we make. I gave up having guns, although I still have archery bows and I still practice archery. I don't have any guns because of my own relationships with guns. I know as a psychologist that there's a change in personality that happens. When a young man on a motorcycle does not think the same way as a young man who's not on a motorcycle. And I'm talking male here because I'm male and that's where my experience is. And the same thing that comes with a gun. A person with a gun has a different mindset than a person who doesn't have a gun just simply by the possession of the gun. And I'm very thankful for you and people like you who recognize that the training of that person who has the gun is important because it helps steer their mindset towards the issues that you brought up about levels of escalation. I think a person who has a gun who is trained to go through those steps rather than a person who is going to react out of fear is being a responsible person with a firearm. With me, being responsible is not having a firearm. So, I mean, we all have those choices that we make, and we should respect people's choices. So I want to thank you for your talk.
Venerable Scott, I had a question for you.
Sure.
Have you ever had someone in your training classes that you were like, this person should not have a gun, and do you have the right to not train them or not certify them?
I do have that right, and I've never encountered that. It tends to be a very self-selecting group. People who go to get a concealed carry permit, which is part of the course, because people who take my course and are planning on getting a concealed carry permit, for example, they know they're going to go through a background check. They know that in Washington State, you actually have to have a letter certifying that you are not legally adjudicated mentally deficient, I believe is the term they use. I could be wrong about that, but you get the idea. So it's a very self-selecting process. So no, the people who take my course tend to be extremely responsible, and they understand exercising restraint, especially when I tell them that no matter how in the right you are, and when I say right, I mean legally, from a legal perspective, you're potentially looking at $200,000 to $300,000 worth of legal fees, even if you're in the right. And I use that word, of course, in a legal sense. That catches people's attention. So I think people, I hope, knock on wood, people leave my class with the intention of exercising restraint at all costs.
Reverend Scott, I have a few observations to offer too.
Please.
As far as the idea of livelihood and whether something is causing suffering, there's an aspect to look at, which is the philosophical versus the practical. It's a philosophical question to ask, should we be allowed to have guns? Should prisons exist, and so forth? And there's a practical matter to consider that they already exist. We already have them. Is it practical then to have people who are willing to dive into those seas of suffering to help mitigate them from within, whether it's as a gun safety instructor or somebody who volunteers to go into a prison? It's like, how can you comply with the prison regulations? They're draconian, they're inhumane. I was like, yes, I absolutely agree. But until those things change, they're still causing suffering. And by going in and complying with the rules, I can help mitigate some of that suffering from within. Or maybe I work for a corporation that's dumping toxic waste into the environment, but I'm part of the environmental safety, and I'm mitigating that, and it would be worse if I weren't there. Just a matter of perspective. Again, addressing practical matters versus philosophical, while both ultimately are needed, we can't always be the one that addresses both, but we can look at both.
Yeah, and to that end, and this brings me back to seeing things as they are, because a very common sentiment is guns should be banned. And in a absolute theoretical situation, I'd be okay with that. Except then there's the practical problem of there are somewhere between 250 and 350 guns in circulation in this country. Now, some people will think that's good, some people will think that's bad, but it just is. It just is. That's the way it is. So to say guns should be banned is kind of turning your back to the reality, maybe harsh reality, that there are 200,000 to 300,000 guns in circulation, and banning them is, it's just not going to happen. So exactly, you really have to see things as they are, not as we want them to be. Because my wonderful teacher, thank you, he has told me over and over again, suffering is things as we see, things as they are, things as we want them to be, such is the nature of suffering. So we have to accept things as they are, or it may lead to suffering.
So, Scott, I hate to interrupt, but you said 250,000. Did you mean million?
I'm sorry. Did I say thousand?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, a million. It's million. Thank you for catching that.
Yeah, because I have friends that have thousands of guns.
Yes, 250 to 350 million. Yes, exactly.
Million
Thank
guns.
you.
Absolutely.
A few more zeros there.
And also, I want to add as another thought, one of my favorite movies is A Few Good Men. And there's a line that Jack Nicholson, who plays the badass colonel in the show, says that he says, "You need me on that wall. You want me on that wall." And the point of that is that our lives here in America or our lives anywhere on this planet are in some way dependent in the ability of our military and our government and everything else to stand up against aggression. And whether we want to admit our participation in that or not, those people standing on those walls with those guns are doing it for us. And we are accepting that as part of our American way or our freedom or our lives as, you know, and it doesn't have to be American. I mean, it had, you know, they have the same thing in other countries, you know, but the idea that somehow we're separate from the use of guns and the use of force is not really addressing the world as it is. The world as it is, those guns and those people standing on those walls are very much a part of each and every one of our lives. And we need to understand that.
Any other comments? Reverend Scott, I like the concept when you made it a hamburger. It did. It really pointed out our own prejudices. Just to be clear, we have a gun here at the Abbey. And once, many years ago, I was riding a horse up in the mountains and the horse broke its leg. There was no way to get the horse down and the horse was in great pain. I was with somebody else. So we came back down, got a gun, went up and shot the horse. It was that kindness or condemning one to violate the precepts. A great teacher in the Chinese tradition, Chan, said, having precepts to break is the journey of the Mahayana Buddhist. How many here think that gun use under a certain circumstance is okay to do? How many here think that killing is always forbidden? Good talk, Scott. Any other thoughts, comments? I'll never forget a gun being a cheeseburger, though. Bacon cheeseburger. Wonderfully well done.